Have you ever felt, I don't know, trapped by your own thoughts? Well, today we're diving into a pretty radical idea from spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle. What if the biggest thing standing in the way of your happiness isn't your job or your relationships or your bank account, but that constant, nonstop voice chattering away inside your own head?
You know, we spend so much of our lives trying to fix the outside world so we can feel better on the inside. But what if we're looking in completely the wrong place? Eckhart Tolle makes the case that the real source of our stress, our anxiety, it's actually much, much closer to home. And understanding this is the first step toward finding some real peace.
So, the very first step is to just recognize what Tolle calls the voice in the head. This is that constant, almost compulsive stream of internal commentary, the narrator that's running 24/7 in our lives.
I mean, think about it for a second. That voice is always there, right? It's commenting, it's judging, it's worrying. For most of us, we're so used to it, we don't even notice it's a separate thing. We just assume, yep, that's me. I am that voice. But according to Tolle, this case of mistaken identity, that is the fundamental mistake that creates nearly all of our unhappiness.
And nothing really makes this clearer than Tolle's own backstory. He experienced in a really intense way how this inner voice can just spin a story of complete misery that has almost nothing to do with what's actually happening in reality.
So let's go back for a moment. Picture a young Eckhart Tolle in London. He's living in this tiny, pretty bare room. He has to share a bathroom down the hall with like 7 or 8 other people. So, objectively speaking, yeah, his life was not exactly easy.
Okay, but here's where it gets absolutely crucial. The facts of his life were simple. A small room, a shared bathroom. But the story his mind was telling him, it was a catastrophe. I'm a failure. My life is over. The actual pain wasn't coming from the physical room. It was coming from the mental prison his own thoughts had built around him.
And then, one night, something just shifted. He realized, in his own words, the unhappiness was in my head, my thoughts, fears, judgments. And then he says, in that night, the thoughts collapsed. And when the thoughts collapsed, the suffering just vanished.
So, what's the way out of this trap? Tolle calls it freedom from thought. Now, this doesn't mean your brain just goes blank and you become a zombie. It just means you stop identifying with all that chatter. You start to realize you're not the voice, you're the silent listener who's hearing the voice.
It actually took him years to fully make sense of what happened to him, until a Zen monk gave him the final piece of the puzzle with this incredibly simple statement: Zen is when there are no thoughts. And for Tolle, it was like, boom, he finally understood the deep peace he'd been living in. The mental noise had just stopped.
But wait a minute, does not thinking make you stupid? Absolutely not. Tolle argues it's a total opposite. It actually lets you tap into a much deeper intelligence, an intuition that usually gets drowned out by all the mind's noise. It's all about shifting from compulsive thinking to a state of pure presence.
Okay, this all sounds pretty profound, but how do we actually apply it to our messy, everyday lives? Well, it all comes down to bringing our full, undivided attention to life in the present moment.
Tolle gives us a really practical tool for this. The next time you feel stressed, just see it as an alarm bell. It's telling you, hey, you've lost the now. Then just pause and ask yourself this kind of curious question. Can I enjoy the simple flow of energy of this moment? And finally, just shift your focus. Let go of the result you're hoping for and just focus on the doing itself, right here, right now.
This shift changes everything, especially our relationships. See, in an egoic interaction, the other person is basically a means to an end. You want something from them, their money, their approval. But in a present interaction, you really honor the person in front of you. The interaction itself becomes sacred, not transactional. Tolle tells this great story about a car salesman who was so present and joyful, you could just tell his happiness didn't depend on making the sale. And of course, Tolle bought the car.
But here's the thing. This inner shift isn't just some self-help trick for a happier life. Tolle takes this idea way, way further. He argues that it's actually the most critical step in the evolution of our entire species.
He maps out our whole collective journey, something like this. We started out in unconscious unity with nature, pre-thinking. Then, thinking emerged, this incredible, powerful new tool. But then we fell into the trap. We forgot it was just a tool and started believing we were the tool. That's the ego. Now Tolle says, humanity is at a tipping point, ready for a great awakening, a move beyond the limits of the ego. And this isn't just some nice philosophical idea, it's an urgent, practical necessity. The old, ego-driven way of being, supercharged by our technology, is becoming incredibly destructive. It's the engine behind our endless conflicts, our unsustainable consumerism, our destruction of the planet. Humanity, he says, is like a caterpillar that has eaten its entire leaf. It's reached the end of one stage. The only choice left is to transform into something new.
Tolle's conclusion is about as simple and as stark as it gets. For humanity, the choice right now is to evolve or die. Which brings us to the final critical question that's really facing all of us. As our old state of consciousness starts to crumble, are we going to choose collective madness or a collective awakening? The choice, as Tolle suggests, really begins inside each and every one of us.